Hello, welcome everyone to our podcast, Identity Dialogue, Dialoguing with the Other and Myself. I'd like to welcome Lamia, a tech engineer living in the UK and a dynamic woman from the Middle East. Welcome, Lamia.
Hi, thank you very much.
So, Lamia, I wanted to start with a little exercise that we do in our workshops, where imagine you are in the middle of a diagram. You in the middle as a circle is Lamia, and around you are little satellite uh, circles of descriptors and words that are you, Lamia. Can you tell me a little bit about who Lamia is and these descriptors?
Okay, yes. So when I think of myself, there's a few adjectives or descriptors that come to mind. Um, I think the first one would be being adventurous. I've got empathetic on there. I've got brave slash strong. Uh, I've got being a good friend, being free spirited. I'm smart and ambitious. And lastly, I'm a Palestinian.
Interesting and very great descriptors. I was wondering if you could tell me maybe of a happy story when one of your descriptors made you really proud.
Um, so I thought about this question quite a lot, and in all honesty, it was maybe the hardest question to answer. I'm not someone that really is very good at talking about things that I'm particularly like proud of per se, but maybe I would say brave slash strong. Um, I would like to think that I've done a few things in my life that were quite difficult, not very easy to do. And I think the biggest one would be moving to a different continent, different country, completely different culture when I was 17 all by myself. Um, and it has shaped a lot of who I am today, unintentionally. Obviously, I didn't know what I was signing up for when I did this. But looking back at it, it's crazy that a 17-year-old had so much drive and so much ambition to do something with her life other than, staying in that bubble that she's always at, the only thing she's always ever known. And that's something I'm really proud of. And this was just over 7 years ago now. And I still think it's one of the, most courageous things I've done to date.
And where did you move from?
So I moved from the UAE, United Arab Emirates, which is where I was born and raised. It's where my family still lives. And in 2016, I moved to Manchester in the UK.
And what would you say that made you proud of it? What was the thing that was so different for you coming from the Middle East to the UK?
I think it was probably how open-minded I was to change. Because a lot of people have asked me in the last 7 years while living here, like, oh, how did I find the shift? Was it, scary? Did I get a culture shock? And I didn't experience any of that. And I don't think that's because I was, prepared for this or I knew exactly what to expect or I was naive. I think I was just very, very ready for a change, whatever that change was. Um, so I wanted to experience something different with my life. And yeah, that's something I'm really proud of, especially at that young age. If you had told me that at 17 years old, I'd be doing one of the things that I'd consider to be the most, difficult or bravest 7 years later, I would have said, nah. Surely I would have done more things by now. I mean, I have, but it's still probably high on the list of things I'm really proud of.
Okay, great. So I'm wondering if there's another story where you were less proud or a bit sad of one of your descriptors.
Yeah, this one, funny enough, was one of the easier ones to answer. It's a very clear one for me, and that's being a good friend. The reason I can confidently say that I'm a good friend to begin with is because I know that I'll be there when I'm needed. I will listen, I'll provide, I'll support, I'll do everything in my capability to be there for a friend when I'm needed. But I can also be very difficult to get hold of when nothing is wrong, when everything is just fine. I'm awful at reaching out. I'm awful at checking in and just responding to messages, for the sake of catching up with friends. And sometimes I worry that this does come across as like I don't care, or I'm not invested in this friendship, or I'm only there when things go wrong. And that's the opposite of being a good friend, which is one of my descriptors. And it is something that I do need to work on. It's not something that I'm very proud of, and I try to express that to my friends to let them know that I am aware I am awful at reaching out and I'm really sorry, but I still need to change that. So yeah, it's just not having to wait for a problem for me to be present for someone. Like, I want to be present regardless.
So I was wondering about, we talked about in previous discussions about explaining your identity and how it has evolved from being back home in the UAE compared to the UK, and how you've had to do more education around that with people. And I wondered if you could explain or tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, of course. So I think this is a really interesting question, just because I didn't realize that my explanation had evolved at all until I was asked so. The short answer is it went from being a very simple answer because I was surrounded by people who knew how things worked around here. I was in the UAE, everyone knew how things worked around in the UAE. So I had very little explaining to do, sorry. And to be like to just go from saying, oh yeah, I'm half Palestinian, half Syrian, to then having to go like, oh, where am I from? What do you mean? Like, what do you need it for? Is that for paperwork? Is that for legal purposes? Do you just want to know out of interest my ethnicity? So it definitely has changed the answer significantly because there was a lot more explaining to do. The long answer is, when I was in the UAE, there are many immigrants and many expats. So that's why I didn't have to do a lot of explaining as to like me not being Emirati. That was almost like a given. I'm not an Emirati citizen, despite being born and raised there. So the answer was always just half Palestinian, half Syrian, and usually that would suffice. But when I came to the UK, the answer would usually lead to like, oh, so then did you live in Palestine or Syria? And then I would say, oh, neither. I was actually born and raised in the UAE. And then naturally the next thing would be, oh, so does that mean you're Emirati? And then I'd say, no, I'm Jordanian. And then they'd be like, oh, so does that mean you've lived in Jordan? And I'd be like, no, I've never lived in Jordan. And then usually that leads to, very interesting conversations. And you realize that most people outside of the bubble that you grow up in actually have no idea about how things work in certain countries. But that being said, I've come to like appreciate my background and my identity a lot more as a result of these conversations, because yeah, it leads to really, really interesting questions, interesting conversations, interesting topics. Yeah.
So maybe for our listeners, you can tell me a little bit about how it comes that you have a Jordanian passport, how it comes with regards to being Palestinian, and kind of the essence of identity from passport to region to being from Levantine and all of that. I wondered if you could give the readers an understanding of the geopolitical identity realities.
Yeah, so we'll break it down. I think the easiest way to start is by mother and father. So on my dad's side, both my grandparents are Palestinian. In 1948, when the Nakba happened in Palestine, people kind of moved all around. Some people like seeked refuge in different countries, so they went to neighboring countries like Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. Some people just kind of moved to other areas within Palestine, which is, people who ended up, let's say, in the West Bank, or people who ended up in Gaza, etc. So, as a result of what happened that year, people moved around, and then my grandparents ended up being one of the people that had the Jordanian passport, because today we don't have a Palestinian passport. It's not recognized as an official passport, at least. There are documentations, obviously, just not a proper passport that you can use to travel around and move freely. So my grandparents ended up possessing a Jordanian passport. And then my dad was born in Syria. So at some point they moved to Syria. And this is where my dad and all his siblings were born. As for my mum's side, so I say Syrian just, for the ease of it, but she's actually half Syrian, half Kurdish. But I'm not in touch with my Kurdish side, so that's why it's very kind of difficult for me to speak about it, just because I didn't grow up with the culture or the language at all. And then she also had the Jordanian passport prior to marrying my dad, just because my granddad served in the Jordanian army or for the Jordanian army. And then they gave him the nationality or the citizenship as a little thank you, I guess. And yeah, my parents got married. They had me in the UAE, but just because you're born in the UAE, it doesn't mean that you get the nationality or get the passport. So as a result of that, you usually get the passport of your dad. So that's why I've got a Jordanian passport, despite having lived, I was born there. So yeah, that's how I have this mix that I've got now. And then I moved to the UK when I was 17. But yeah, I'm still here on a visa, so I'm not British by any means. So yeah.
So it's interesting how geopolitics and culture kind of creates this mix of identities, and borders are fluid and changing all the time, with regards the name you call yourself and the origins that you come from, and what you are. I actually was wondering, which is really interesting, is what it means to be a woman from the Middle East. In the UK and in the Middle East, is it different? And then a corollary question after that, what does the hijab mean to you? Because I think in the West, there's a lot of symbolism and a lot of perceptions about women in hijab, and what that means to be a woman from the Middle East. So I wondered if you might answer that first question and then follow it with the answer to the second.
Of course. So for the first part, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that being a woman from the Middle East in the UK means constantly being challenged by stereotypes, and then also challenging them as well. But this goes for being a woman and being a Middle Eastern, and then being a combination of both. Each descriptor comes with its own set of challenges. It's also important to understand that there isn't one right way to be a Middle Eastern woman, regardless as to where you live or where you were born or any of that. And I've been multiple versions of that woman as well throughout my life. I mean, especially while living in the UK, because I think this is where I, became an adult and had to find myself and where I fit in society and all that. So when I first came here, I was, I think, a bit more shy, a bit more timid. I kept to myself a lot more. I felt the pressure of representing Middle Eastern women in the UK, like amongst the West. And I did not enjoy that pressure at all. So I was relatively quiet. I tried to not take up too much space in a room, in a conversation. So yeah, I was very different to who I am now. And then after maybe, I don't know what the right word would be, but maybe freeing myself from that pressure, and realizing that I'm not single-handedly responsible for the image and the reputation of Middle Eastern women around the world. I started to explore a lot more with my identity. I explored with my physical appearance to begin with, because I think that's a very big thing for just people in general. One of the quick ways that people identify or put a label on you is just by how you look. I explored with my hobbies, with my lifestyle, even with food diets, which might sound, very harmless, but it being a Middle Eastern, there's a lot of also assumptions as to how you eat, what your diet is. We love our meat, we love our food, we love all that, which is things I've also started experimenting with. And I think that's when I realized that there's no one guideline to being a Middle Eastern woman. There's no one right way to do it, especially in the West. You will meet women that cover the entire range of, from being very outgoing, very outspoken, very political, to women that are just more, keeping to themselves, more women that are, let's say, more traditional. You'll find women that want to conquer everything, that want to achieve everything there is to achieve, to women that are happy to maintain the role of a housewife, to, build a home. And yeah, I don't think there are boundaries to what to being a Middle Eastern woman. There's
And
no.
do you think that Middle Eastern, although that's a large geographic area, prevents you, the women who want to do everything, who want to achieve things in the world, do you think the culture prevents you from doing that?
I don't think it's the culture. I
Okay.
think unfortunately, and it's hard for me to say, but as much as I've got the privilege to be able to experience and, try everything that I want to try, not every woman, and especially Middle Eastern woman, has the privilege of doing that. Um, and I can't say that it's down to culture, because you'll find two households from very similar backgrounds, very similar, countries, or even cities, or two households that have the exact same backgrounds, but they will raise their kids very differently, with very different values and very different set of rules. And I've experienced that with growing up in the Middle East, and having friends from similar backgrounds, but we did not have the same set of rules as to what we could and couldn't do. So I don't really know what it would come down to. I think it's just different from one household to another. And obviously, I wish that wasn't the case. I really wish that every woman has the privilege to experience life however she'd like to experience it, but that's not the case, unfortunately.
And what about the hijab? What is your perspective on the hijab? The perspective from the West of the hijab, your personal experience of the hijab?
Yeah, so I love this question because I have a personal experience with the hijab. So some people in my life might know that I used to wear a hijab. It's not something that I hide at all. If you go to my socials and you scroll back down like far enough, you'll see pictures of me wearing it. And its meaning for me has evolved over time. It's not been static at all. So when I started wearing it, I think I was around 13, 14. And I was in the UAE. I was surrounded by like-minded people. I didn't really have to explain myself at all when I wanted to wear it, because a lot of people around me were wearing it as well. I didn't have people asking me challenging questions that really forced me to kind of formulate an answer. It was just like, oh, congratulations, that's really good. I'm proud of you for doing this. You're doing the right thing, etc. And yeah, people were generally just very positive about it, but there weren't any questions that required explanation.
And what was the reason that you wanted to wear the hijab? And what are the reasons that people wear the hijab?
So for me personally, at the time, it was my way of getting closer to God. And it was also heavily encouraged by people around me, my surroundings, my friends. So me and a few friends at school at the time wore it at the same time. So yeah, there was a community around it, which was very nice and very encouraging as well. At the same time, my mom wore it, so I guess that also made it easier, because I know a few friends who started wearing it without their mums wearing it, which might have been a bit more challenging. Um, and yeah, that was about it. There wasn't a lot more thought that was put into it. And I had it on for over 3 years. And then I moved to the UK in 2016, and I still had it on. Um, and when I moved, there was a bit of worry, I guess, or concern from my family because of what you hear in the news. It's like, oh, just please be careful. You're in the West now, you're wearing a headscarf, people are going to label you, you might be targeted, etc. Just Islamophobia and all that. But I'm very, very lucky to say that I've not experienced any of that at all. So the reasons that I ended up taking it off have nothing to do with, being harassed or being targeted or being treated badly at all. The reason that I ended up taking it off is because when I moved here, people started asking questions, and they weren't bad questions at all. They were asking from a place of interest, a place of curiosity. And I was being challenged for the first time. And I realized that I don't have the answers to a lot of the questions that they were asking. And also, I started to feel the pressure because it felt like I was representing Muslim women a lot more now. And I felt like there was an image that I had to uphold. And I was answering on behalf of a lot of women, because for a lot of people, they have never had the chance to ask someone who was wearing hijab all these questions. And I was very open to the questions. I, provided a safe space where they could ask anything, and I thought I could answer all of them, but unfortunately I couldn't. And then that pressure just got to me. I didn't really enjoy being a representative for something that I wasn't ready to represent. And that's why I ended up taking it off, just because I didn't feel good for that responsibility. But that being said, what does the hijab mean to me now? It still should mean everything that it's meant to me, as in, it's for the majority of people, it's a form of, practicing their religion. It's a form of getting closer to God. It's a form of just a sacrifice that one would do for God. And this is their form of, feeling pious. And I wish that I could say this is the case for everyone who wears a hijab. Unfortunately, I don't want to take away from the people that are, being forced to wear it, the people that don't have the freedom of choice, the people that can't freely express how they want to dress, how they want to present themselves to the world. I don't take away from that at all. And I have grown up around people who were forced to wear it, unfortunately. So I don't take away from them at all. They very much exist. They very much are, being oppressed. But I also do want to say, for the majority, it is a choice. It was a choice for me. I was very, very happy to wear it. And then I also had the choice of taking it off, which I, need to acknowledge that not everyone has as well. So yeah, it means different things to different people, but what it should mean is just freedom of choice and freedom of practicing what you believe in.
Right. I actually did have a little practical question about wearing a hijab in 50-degree heat. How do people manage it, and what are the kind of rationalization that they do to wear it in that kind of heat?
As someone who wore it in that heat, it didn't really affect anything. It didn't change much about how I felt about the hijab. I think because regardless of what you're wearing, it's hot. It's hot anyway. That one extra layer that you're putting on does not change, how hot it is really. But then even if it did, for the majority of people, it's a very, very small sacrifice that is worth the outcome, which is being closer to God. So when you have a bigger goal, something much greater than you that you are trying to achieve, the heat is a very minuscule factor, if at all. So it's something that's very easy to get over, because there's a bigger goal in sight, and that is just, being closer to your God.
Interesting. Very interesting. I wanted to ask a question a little bit about your Palestinian roots and how you identify with your Palestinian roots, and what does the story you were told about where you are from affect you, with regards to your father's origins and that origin story for you? And then again, the second question is, what does it mean to be from Levantine for you?
Yeah, of course. So I'll start with what it means to be from Levantine. So the first thing that comes to mind easily is just my culture. I'm someone that is so proud of my culture and in love with it. I love the food, the music, the clothing, the dancing. It all is something that I find a lot of joy in. That's obviously not to say that all the countries in the region have identical cultures, because Levantine consists of 4 different countries. It's Palestine, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. Obviously they've got their differences, but they're similar enough, at least to me, because I grew up in a household that was, both Palestinian and Syrian. And funny enough, I don't always know which bit comes from which country. It kind of all just merges into this one culture that I grew up with. And this is something that I find a lot of comfort and a lot of pride in. But also what my culture represents to me is a lot of kindness, a lot of generosity, and in general, Arabs are known to be some of the most hospitable people. It's a stereotype that we've got, and you know, Palestinians and Syrians are no exception to that. And it's something that I've seen in my own house growing up with my parents, and I think that kind of feeds into the first question that you asked me, and then when I said I like to think of myself as a good friend, it definitely comes from there a little bit because I've watched my parents just be present for people in need. And I took on that a lot. But then on a much, much deeper level, I think being from these countries, but even more specifically being a Palestinian, it means resilience. I think of my people as very, very strong, a big, symbol of resilience because the majority of us are diaspora. Like I said, Palestinians are descendants of their grandparents, and wherever their grandparents have ended after 1948 doesn't make it any less of a Palestinian. So you've got Palestinians in every single corner of the world, like myself, who was once in the UAE and now I'm in the UK. And I've met loads of other people like myself. And I've never even been to Palestine, and it still doesn't make me any less Palestinian, because if the diaspora do not continue identifying with their heritage, with their lineage, with their culture, then it will very, very quickly die. So it's very important to not let events like what happened to our grandparents in 1948 let our culture die and let dictate who my identity is, because it's not limited to the borders that I reside within. And I think that's what makes our people very, very resilient, because regardless of where you are, which corner of the world, whether you are in the West Bank, in Gaza, in the West, in any country, Palestinians hold on to their identity very, very strongly, because we refuse to let it die as a consequence of just historical events. And if it did, then that's erasing history, and if I didn't keep it alive, then who else will?
So, can Palestinians live with others and still maintain their culture?
100%. And I very confidently say that because I continue to do that every single day. I've done that from the day that I was born. I've always lived around people that were not Palestinian, not Arab, not from the same region, not from the same culture at all. And I think it's not just can we, but it's we need to know how to do it. And that doesn't just apply for Palestinians, that applies for absolutely everyone from everywhere. And it's not just limited to your culture or your nationality at all. I think we all need to learn how to live amongst people that are not like us, whether that is in culture, in beliefs, in traditions, in lifestyle. It's just something that is very important, a skill that you have to develop, because you will never just exist around people that are like yourself. And you not only need to know how to do it, but also find joy in doing it and appreciate the opportunities that you get when you live amongst people that are not necessarily like yourself. So yeah, definitely can as a Palestinian and should do it as a Palestinian. And that doesn't take away from your identity at all.
So I was wondering if you could tell me your favorite food, your favorite Palestinian food.
Yes, of course. So funny story. I'm actually mostly a vegetarian. So most of my diet is vegetarian. I don't eat meat, I don't cook it, I don't buy it, etc. However, the exception would be Palestinian or traditional food. And I think it's because there's an element of nostalgia there, and it's one of the ways that I connect with my culture. So when I go back home, I am no longer a vegetarian, especially when it comes to my mum's cooking. So my favorite dish is called msakhan, or if you were to search it up, you'd spell it as musakan. And it consists of a layer of bread. It's Arabic bread, which is similar to pita, and then it's drenched in olive oil, lots of onion, lots of seasoning, and a lot of sumac, and then topped with chicken. And it's, I think, one of the biggest comfort foods for me. And you can also make it in ways that, you know, are a bit more easy to consume, I guess. And that's the way that my mum made it for us growing up. So you can just roll them into small sandwiches, batch freeze them, and, you know, have one whenever you want. And it's yeah, I associate it with a lot of comfort and a lot of nostalgia. And I think everyone listening should find a Palestinian restaurant ASAP to try one.
Oh, well, I think that's what I'm going to do when I come to London next week. So thank you, Lamia, for educating us and telling us about who you are and where you're from, and you as a woman, a Middle Eastern woman, and all the other professional and interesting, adventurous things that you do. I want to thank you and have a great day.
Thank you very much.